it's described by somebody else, then he won't. That version of Jesus can't change your life. He certainly can't lead you to the Father in heaven. The best way for us to know our rescuing Savior is to listen to how he describes himself. Jesus uses I am statements. And we talked about that last week, how I am is a loaded phrase. You can't miss that. Jesus isn't using I am the way you and I might use I am. But he's using I am statements, and it reveals something significant about him. It is true, right, that if you and I use I am statements and we say, I am a father, I am a husband, I am a wife, I am a teacher, I am a child, I'm an employer, I'm a business owner, I'm a coach, etc., it reveals something significant about who you are and what you do. It tells people something very valuable about the kind of person you are and the things that you do. You're making a big, bold statement about your identity when you say, I am, and then there's something that follows that. When you say, I am a Cowboys fan, you're saying, I'm a future Super Bowl champion. That's what you're saying. It's significant. It's important to listen. How does Jesus describe himself? Look at this. Who does Jesus think he is? Who does Jesus believe himself to be? Who does he explain himself to be? Look at this list of I ams that he uses. I am the bread of life. We'll do that today. I am the light. I'm the door. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the resurrection. I'm the way. And I'm the vine. And here, this is so important. We're not supposed to just learn these so that we can win in the family Bible trivia game. Instead, we're to read these, and it's supposed to light us up with expectation and insight that this is God's character. Jesus is revealing to us who he is. In other words, this is revealing to us something important. It's helping us to understand that he has glorious character, and he describes that to us with these phrases. And also, it's a motivator to worship. We'll be reviewing this idea every single week of the series, that he says, I am, all these things, and not just for us to fill our brains with knowledge, but for us to see his glorious character more clearly, and also as an impetus for us to worship him. Our life with Jesus isn't compelled by religion. It isn't compelled by expectation. It's not compelled by tradition. It's based on a clear grasp of who he is. And today we're going to learn together Jesus' description of himself. I am the bread of life. And we're going to see and savor this picture of who he reveals himself to be together. You must know Jesus in his own words to really worship him. So here's our big idea today. Jesus thinks about himself that he was sent by God to satisfy our deepest cravings, both now and also for eternity or forever. Do you remember where you were when you ate your first peanut butter and jelly sandwich on Wonder Bread? Who remembers that? I remember exactly where I was when I had my first sandwich made with Wonder Bread in the 70s. Bread. Jesus says to himself, says to you, I am the bread of life. And bread, I wish this wasn't true. I wish your pastor was more spiritual. I wish that I instantly, when I heard Jesus say bread of life, I wish that I instantly thought of him breaking himself and passing his broken body out to us. But I don't. I think of Wonder Bread. I think of this brilliant idea to put white carbs and sugar into an oven and bake it, and then put peanut butter on it and jelly on it, and then later on, by God's grace, then there came Nutella for us. But after Wonder Bread, I discovered something called cheesy garlic bread. So when I was young and dumb, I thought Wonder Bread, that's the best you can get. And then as I grew up, someone introduced me to a gateway drug called cheesy garlic bread. Would it hurt your feelings if we just looked at that for a few seconds? It's so embarrassing. Then came the discovery of artisan bread. And Tuscan, I don't mind a Tuscan bread. Homemade out of the oven, crunchy crust, soft and melty in the middle, a little garlic butter. But that's not where it stopped. My addiction grew. I went from the gateway drug all the way into almond croissants, toasted in the toaster. Then, of course, the only way you could improve bread is to twist dessert into it, right? Once you're addicted to bread, it's like, where do I go from here? Here's an idea: twist some dessert into it. The only problem with bread, there's really only one problem with bread, and the only problem really with bread is that just a little doesn't satisfy. And when you're done with the bread, you're not done forever. You're starting to think about the next slice of bread. That's how I work, especially around 9 p.m. If I go for bread around 9 p.m., I'm up in the wee hours of the night eating more bread. I'm not just awake. And the problem is that bread, as we understand it, never fully satisfies. It's satisfying, but it doesn't leave us full. It leaves us craving more bread. And there's reasons why that happens to our body. I learned that the more I eat, the more I want. It always leads to craving more. And it's filling, but it's not fulfilling, right? So this is important for us to know, because Jesus describes himself as the bread. And I like to think of him in the terms that he uses. And he says, I'm the bread of life. We're going to learn together here in John chapter 6. John chapter 6, Jesus is describing himself to people who are following him. And you can follow along with me here. We're going to look at Jesus in his own words describing himself as bread. Starting with verse 28. We're in chapter 6. We'll look at verse 28 all the way down. Specifically, we'll stop at verse 35. They replied, "We want to perform God's works too." Well, what should we do? Jesus told them, "This is the only work God wants from you. Believe in the one he has sent." They answered, "Show us miraculous sign if you want us to believe in you. What can you do? After all, our ancestors ate manna while they were journeyed through the wilderness. The scriptures say Moses gave them bread from heaven to eat. And Jesus said, I tell you the truth, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven, my Father did. And now he offers you the true bread from heaven. The true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Everybody say life. He gives life to the world. We're going to dive into that. Sir, they said, give us that bread every day. What is the true bread that gives life to the world? Here's what Jesus is saying. It's Jesus himself. It's not religion. It's not the Christian faith. It's not churches. It's not membership. It's not prayer. It's not all the things that you can do to practice your faith. The life that came from heaven isn't living a better life as a Christian or to stop living a bad life as a non-believer. The real bread of life that God gives us to understand him, to consume him, to be nourished in him is Jesus himself. And Jesus says, I am the bread of life. So who does Jesus think he is? Does he really think he's bread? Here's what he says. Jesus replies to them in verse 35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty again. The original hearers of this, here's what they would have been listening and hearing. If they were listening to Jesus, they would have been hearing him talk about two things. Not just himself and bread, but they would have just seen Jesus miraculously feed a crowd of people. And they were a ravenous crowd, and it was a disruptive crowd, and Jesus had just soothed them by feeding them miraculously with just a few loaves and fishes. But they would have also been thinking about how God had provided manna for the Israelites in the desert. Two things they would have thought of. They just experienced a miracle with a couple of loaves and fishes from Jesus, and then their ancestors experienced a miracle as God fed them in the wilderness with manna that had come miraculously from heaven. But Jesus clarifies this, and I want you to notice this. Jesus makes a specific distinction here that there's two kinds of hunger. There's two kinds of hunger. There's physical hunger and there's spiritual hunger, right? Did you know that? That there is not just the physical hunger of your body, but there's also a spiritual hunger that we're hardwired with. And number one, here's what we're going to take away here from this passage. There's a deeper appetite in humans. There's a deeper appetite, and it's beyond physical hunger. That means that there is more of our appetite than just feeding our bodies something made of physical bread. The true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and he gives life to the world. So there's bread, right, which is manna, feeds the body, but then there is the true bread, true life, which comes from God as well. And this does something different. It doesn't just feed the body, it feeds the soul. So there's this, the Greek words, this is fascinating. The Greek word in the New Testament for life, there's two of them. There's two words for life when the phrase bread of life is used. One is the word bios, right? Can you guess what the word bios means? Physical life. Right? Bios is biology. Bios is really, it just simply means biological life. And then there's another word called zoe. Zoe. And zoe is a word used to describe something called the quality of life. So zoe is a life full of meaning and significance and exhilaration and joy. And when Jesus said, I'm the bread of life, he didn't say, I'm the bread of biological life. Of course, he uses this word zoe, and he says, I am the bread who's come from heaven, and I am the source of zoe. What does that mean? I am the source of a life worth living, significance, importance, value, joy, and meaning. And zoe is the kind of life that makes life worth living. And Jesus says, don't crave only physical food. There's more. There's not just bios for you to enjoy, right, which is a glimpse of heaven, but there's also zoe, which brings our souls to life. And Jesus says, don't labor just for the food that you're going to eat. Put the work in and labor to make sure that you're feeding yourself zoe, that even if that physical bread is provided by God himself, there's still more. So in other words, even though God provided the manna to the Israelites, that wasn't all there was to live by. Man doesn't live on bread alone. There's more to life than that. And instead, God's people are to long for and live for the spiritual bread that comes down from heaven, and it gives quality life, a zoe life, to the world. And Jesus says, don't get stuck, don't get ensnared only pursuing physical bread to feed your body. Don't crave only physical food. There's more. C.S. Lewis talks about this. C.S. Lewis, a philosopher, author. It's brilliant, right? Here's what he says about our cravings. C.S. Lewis says that creatures are not born with desires unless a satisfaction for that desire exists. Then he gives examples, and he says, baby feels hunger, and the reason a baby feels hunger is because there is something called food that exists. And ducklings want to swim, so there's something provided in the earth called water for the duckling to swim. Humans feel sexual desire, and well, there's a thing as sex. And if I find myself, this is worth following along, check this out. If I find myself, this is still C.S. Lewis, a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy,